The Chamber of Real Estate and Builders Associations Incorporated, or CREBA, is the single biggest Philippine organization of professionals and agrupations comprising the widest cross-section of the housing and real estate industry. These are developers, brokers, appraisers, contractors, manufacturers, suppliers, engineers, architects, and others engaged in the shelter and real estate business. As early as 1960s, to unite the different disciplines involved in the industry, the idea of an umbrella organization was conceived. During that time, private subdivisions were mushrooming in the peripheries of Metro Manila. Due to fast pace of development, the developers and buyers were confronted with different obstacles and problems. In October 1973, Attorney Manuel M. Serrano, joined by the leaders of the industry, formally founded CREBA. The chamber is registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission as a non-stock, non-profit, non-government organization. To protect and promote the interests of the members, CREBA seeks to harmonize the conflicting forces of business, government, and the homeless society. CREBA has committed to be an effective and dynamic partner for national development, as the real estate industry being a major pump primer of the economy, and the government recognizes this role. The Chamber sits in legislative hearings in both houses of Congress on bills that bear impact on the industry, to ensure that the interest of the members and the welfare of the public in general is enhanced. For over 40 years, the Chamber can take pride on what it has done, pushing for reforms, drawing up significant proposals, and mustering the strength to push its plans forward into real action. Today, CREBA is at crossroads of facing the challenges of the past and the present. Its initiatives and advocacies have been consistently focused not just on the interests of its members, but also enabling the millions of homeless families to acquire decent, affordable homes, vigilant in its dream to see a home for every Filipino. CREBA's aspirations for the housing sector is embodied in its 5-point agenda for housing. It's a package of interrelated policy and legislative reform proposals, ensuring that every Filipino is able to live a full and happy life in a home he can call his own. 3 major issues that need to be effectively and cohesively addressed in order to curb the country's at least 5.5 million housing backlog are finance, land, and governance. The 5-point agenda aims to provide long-term and affordable funds for socialized and economic housing, affordable homes in urban areas nationwide, equitable allocation of lands for human settlements, agriculture, and the environment, efficient housing regulations, and the creation of a housing and urban development department that will address housing concerns. The 5-point agenda pursues CREBA's long-term avowed mission of making homes more affordable for the majority of Filipinos, a home where his family can live, work, play, and grow. CREBA leaves no stones unturned in its relentless vision towards a home for every Filipino, transforming the environment of social and economic development, leading to the intensified production of 500,000 housing units every year to build 10 million homes in a span of 2 decades.
ma'am. There should be a mic. Okay, I'm done. Okay, I'm ready. Okay. First, I'd like to greet everybody a good morning and a good day, and welcome to the Industry Update Forum of CREBA. I am Techi Bautista, the CREBA Vice President for Academic Affairs. The CREBA Industry Updates aim to provide its members with a forum to access information and to dialogue with government and industry leaders towards a better understanding and appreciation of the purposes and intents of the regulations under the new normal. Let us start with our program this morning with a short prayer. Dear Lord, we lift and offer our day to you, as well as CREBA and its programs and the Industry Update series. Give us the wisdom and the courage to face life's opportunities and challenges, knowing that you will always be with us to guide and protect us. Amen. Let us now welcome our National President, Mr. Noel Toti Carino, for his opening remarks. Excuse me.
Good morning, fellow Crebans. Good morning, Techi. Thank you very much for this forum once again as part of our regular updating of our members. Today's forum is very interesting. It will show us how the government is reacting based on the normal that we are facing with. And so I am sure that the members will welcome most of the discussions that will be done here. Again, we do this thing. So for the members that are currently active and getting themselves updated, we have this regular forum to ensure that our business and that our industry stays ahead of the current challenges that we are all facing with. So without much further ado, I would like to say a pleasant and passion and a pleasant discussion and interaction with our speakers who will be doing us a good honor of really showing us the way on how government really reacts on all of this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President Toti Noel Carino. Our topic for this morning is going to be a forum with the Bangko Sentral of the Philippines and the Anti-Money Laundering Council on the housing loans and policy regulations relative to real estate development. We have two resource persons with us this morning. The first is the Honorable Iluminada T. Sicat, Senior Assistant Governor on the Monetary Policy Subsector of the BSP. And the other speaker is going to be Attorney Mel Georgie Racela, Executive Director of the Anti-Money Laundering Council. Mr. Sicat, Ms. Iluminada Sicat is the Senior Assistant Governor of the Monetary Policy Subsector, which is in charge of the following functions. Number one, formulation and recommendation of monetary and financial policies. They're also in charge of conducting research and economic and financial forecasting. And thirdly, they're responsible for the generation and dissemination of monetary, financial, and external sector statistics relative to the Bangko Sentral programs. Ms. Sicat first joined the bank in 1983, where she was assigned to the Department of Economic Research. She became director of the Department of Economic Statistics in 2005. And in May 2009, she was seconded to the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, initially as advisor to the executive director of the Southeast Asian Voting Group, and later promoted to be a senior advisor. In February 2012, Ms. Sicat became managing director of the then currency management subsector in charge of the BSP's currency operations in Metro Manila and in December 2015 as head of the Regional Monetary Affairs subsector, where she provided guidance and direction in the operation and management of the 3 regional offices and 19 branches of the Bangko Sentral of the Philippines. Ms. Sikat is a graduate of Bachelor of Arts of Science in Statistics from the University of the Philippines and holds a master's degree in International Affairs from the Columbia University as a World Bank Scholar. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all listen and welcome to our first resource person, the Honorable Iluminada T. Sikat. Good morning po.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Ms. Techi. CREBA National President, Mr. Noel Carino, officers and members of CREBA, and to everyone joining us online, a pleasant good morning. We thank the organizers for inviting the BSP in today's forum. In line with the theme of this year's forum, let me share some updates on the Philippine economic performance and the BSP's policy actions to support the national government's whole-of-nation approach in addressing the current crisis. I will also discuss the latest updates on some macro indicators on the real estate sector and the emerging policy responses to the challenges of COVID-19 to help cope with the challenges of the pandemic and support economic growth and recovery. Now, let me begin with an overview of the performance of the Philippine economy in 2020. Some of the key economic indicators in 2020 show that the country's macroeconomic fundamentals remained broadly intact, even at the peak of the COVID-19 crisis, as evidenced by the quarter-on-quarter improvements in GDP outturn towards the year end, within target inflation, ample system liquidity, sound and stable banking system, robust external payment position, and manageable fiscal deficit. Now, this was supported by improving sentiment of the business sector and consumers. Business confidence on the economy continued to be upbeat for 2 consecutive quarters now, after slumping to negative territory in Q3 2020. Consumer outlook based on Q4 2020 survey was also less pessimistic, with the overall confidence index turning positive for Q1 2021. The impact of the pandemic on both consumer confidence and business sentiment was mitigated to a large extent by relaxation of mobility restrictions, improving economic activity, rollout of the vaccine for COVID-19, the citizens' adoption to the new normal, and development of new business and marketing strategies amid the new operating environment. Another major factor for the country's continued resilience is the implementation of policy support measures by the BSP. As the current crisis is unprecedented, the measures we have implemented in 2020 were also unprecedented. The extraordinary liquidity easing measures of the BSP, including the reduction of the reserve requirement and the cumulative 200 basis points reduction in policy rate, resulted into an estimated BSP liquidity injection to the financial system of about 2 trillion, equivalent to around 11% of the country's nominal GDP for 2020. Now, these measures ensure the continued flow of liquidity for lending and induce lower cost of borrowing. However, in the first quarter of 2021, the country started experiencing inflation pressures. For 3 consecutive months, we saw inflation slightly breaching the upper bound of the BSP's target range of 2 to 4%, with year-to-date inflation averaging 4.5%. Nevertheless, we note that the latest outturn is consistent with the BSP's prevailing assessment of a transitory uptick in inflation in the first half of 2021. Looking more into details, The food accounts for most of the recent upticks in inflation, owing mainly to supply-side constraints on key food items, as well as the rise in inflation of transport services associated with increase in prices of petroleum products and reduced load capacity to comply with social distancing. The BSP expects inflation rate to moderate by the last quarter of 2021, especially with the adoption by the government of non-monetary measures such as tariff rate cuts on some imported commodities to ease the supply constraints. Now, in the labor sector, unemployment rate has considerably improved from a high of 17.6% in April 2020 to 8.8% in February 2021, although this level is still higher compared to the pre-pandemic level of unemployment of around 5%. Now, behind this positive development is the gradual reopening of the economy, which allowed more people to rejoin the labor force. Meanwhile, the country's external position continued to hold up well despite the deficit in the overall balance of payments in the first 2 months of the year, due mainly to the pickup in trade deficit as the economy recovers. While the BOP deficit reflects a decrease in the final gross international reserves to 105.2 billion as of end February 2021, this represents a more than adequate external liquidity buffer, which can help cushion the domestic economy against external shocks. This buffer is equivalent to 12 months worth of imports of goods and payments of services. The external debt to GDP ratio remained manageable at 27.2%, down from 57.3% in 2005. Given that bulk of the country's external debt have medium and long-term maturity and are fixed interest rate bearing, debt repayment schedule is more manageable and financially sustainable over the long-term horizon. The national government also managed to keep its fiscal position at a sustainable level despite the significant funding requirement amid the pandemic. After many years of declining trend, the public debt to GDP ratio went up to 58% as of end February 2021, as the government tapped domestic and international debt markets to plug shortfall in revenue collections and fulfill funding requirements for COVID-19 response efforts. Majority of the national government's debt is sourced domestically. The government's track record of fiscal discipline has helped to keep its borrowing cost low despite the increased financing requirement. Long-term debt sustainability also remains intact, with the debt trajectory seen to easily revert to a downtrend upon the restoration of pre-COVID growth and deficit levels. The country's banking system continues to be financially sound to function well as intermediator of funds despite various operational and market constraints which were encountered during the pandemic. The bank's capital buffers are well above the BSP's minimum capital requirement and the BIS standards. Meanwhile, the bank's non-performing loans and non-performing asset ratios were modest at 3.2% and 2.2% respectively as of end January 2021, compared to the double-digit levels recorded during the Asian financial crisis. Now at this point, let me focus my discussion on the real estate sector and why this is an area of interest for the BSP. While the real estate industry is not under the regulatory purview of the BSP, it is viewed as an important concern in the BSP's conduct of monetary policy and financial supervision for the following reasons. One, asset prices influence general price levels and economic output. Also, volatility in asset prices, which could be brought about by undue speculation or bubbles, may give rise to misalignment in property prices. This in turn may fuel financial instability Now, in the past, what we noted is that real estate boom is primarily financed by bank lending. And the real estate is the most credit-intensive goods, yet one of the most illiquid assets of financial institutions. Moreover, the BSP's policy actions affect the movements and behavior in the property market. For instance, an increase in policy rates lowers the value of asset holdings of individuals and financial institutions. And this could potentially make credit financing more costly for both buyers and property suppliers. And it could effectively contain the property market boom. Now, the real sector and the property markets also play a vital role in supporting the economic growth momentum of the Philippines in two respects. First, the housing sector fulfills the fundamental need for adequate and safe housing for the Filipino people, and housing affects the decision-making of households as rent and mortgage form part of their consumption and investment decisions. Second, the housing market is an important driver of economic growth because of its forward and backward linkages. Real estate construction provides employment opportunities as well as demand in supply chain, such as industrial cement and steel manufacturing and the retail sector. Now in 2020, like most of the industries, the real estate and the construction sectors contributed negatively to the country's GDP. The sector contracted all throughout the 4 quarters of 2020. However, what we noted is that the quarterly contraction was narrowing as the restrictions on mobility and economic activity were gradually relaxed. Demand for real estate in 2020 slipped due to pandemic-related uncertainties. The capital values for office and residential units in the country's major commercial and business districts declined. Now, capital value here refers to the potential return on a real estate investment. Now, meanwhile, the vacancy rate rose during the period due mainly to slowdown in leasing activities, weak demand, and a cautious market. Notwithstanding the weak demand in the property sector, the nationwide residential property prices, based on the BSP's Residential Real Estate Price Index, increased in Q4 2020 relative to prices in the previous quarter and quarter ago. After a steep decline in Q3 2020, the residential real estate prices of various types of new housing units in the Philippines reverted to the positive territory in Q4 2020, with the residential price index rising by 0.8% year-on-year and by 2.4% quarter-on-quarter. The positive growth mainly emanated from the increase in residential property prices in areas outside NCR, reflecting the growing demand for properties in areas outside Metro Manila. Meanwhile, the Commercial Property Price Index, which was developed by the BSP in 2017 as part of its effort to have a more comprehensive measure of real property prices in the country, only has a very short series of until 2018 and does not cover yet the start of the pandemic in Q1 2020. However, we expect the official results for the Commercial Property Index covering 2019 to 2020 by June 2021. So by then, we'll be able to see a more comprehensive measure of the real property prices for both the residential and commercial properties. Meanwhile, in terms of access to credit, bank lending to real estate activities recorded positive growth even during the pandemic. The financial system has continued to support real estate development by providing funds to property developers as well as to households for purchase of homes. As shown in the upper chart, black line, loans to the real estate sector represented a sizable portion of bank lending. The growth of bank lending to the sector has consistently been positive in 2020, although they are at a decelerating trend. Banks have also invested in debt and equity securities, although at a smaller magnitude, and the proceeds of these investments were used to finance real estate activities. It is noteworthy to mention that despite the significant share of banks' exposure to the real estate sector, the ratio of non-performing real estate loans to total real estate loans of banks has been low at 1.7% as of end December 2019, indicating that banks have remained prudent in their assessment of real estate loans. We expect recovery in the real estate market with the vaccine rollout, the improving prospect for the Philippine economy, better income and employment prospects with easing lockdown restrictions, and supportive policy and regulatory measures that could benefit the sector moving forward. On the policy and regulatory front, some of the recent policies and actions undertaken by the BSP that could benefit the sector were aimed at supporting the continued flow of credit at favorable interest rate, incentivizing lending, and improving surveillance. Now, these include a reduction in policy rates by 200 basis points, cut in reserve requirement ratio from 14% to 12%, easing of the real estate loan limit of universal and commercial banks from 20% to 25% of their total loan portfolio, allowing as alternative compliance to deposit for reserve requirement the new loans to large enterprises that were critically impacted by the pandemic, the cut in minimum liquidity ratio of standalone thrift banks and rural banks from 20% to 16% until end December 2021, increasing the single borrower's limit from 25% to 30%, which just expired recently, last end March 2021, the amendment to the guidelines on the real estate stress test limits, and the generation of quarterly index to measure movements in commercial and residential prices. Now, as I said, these policy measures were aimed to support the continued flow of credit at a more favorable interest rate and incentivize the lending of banks to the enterprises, including the real estate sector, as well as improving our surveillance capability. There are also recent legislative measures that could help the real property sector. One is the recently passed law called the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises, or CREATE, which will lower outright the corporate income tax from 30% to 25%. This will have an impact of reducing income tax for businesses, including the real estate industry. And this you may consider as the biggest stimulus package for this pandemic environment. Another bill that could help firms, including the real estate and housing sector, is the Government Financial Institutions Unified Initiative to Distress Enterprises for Economic Recovery, or GUIDE for short, The principal objective of this bill is to provide needed access to credit and financial assistance to distressed businesses, including MSMEs, strategically important companies, and other businesses affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and covered under Republic Act 11494 or the Bayanihan 2 through the programs and initiatives of the GFIs. Now, let me wrap up my presentation and leave you with two key takeaways. One, the Philippine economy is moving towards recovery. This is supported by improving business and consumer sentiment and timely implementation of appropriate policies, including regulatory and operational relief measures. Recently passed legislative measures will also provide support to growth and recovery. Two, the real estate sector was unfavorably affected by the pandemic. However, we see green shoots based on results of the residential real estate price index growth due to rise in property demand outside NCR and the continued growth in bank lending to the real estate activities. It is worth noting, however, that the speed and magnitude of the property sector recovery will also depend on the ability of the government to efficiently roll out the vaccines and rebuild the economy, as this will help boost business and consumer confidence. With this, let me now stop here. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm on mute. No, I'm mute na. Okay, thank you very much, the Honorable Iluminada Sikat of the Bangko Sentral for that presentation. We will immediately proceed to the second resources speaker, Attorney Mel Georgie Racela. He is the Executive Director of the AMLC or Anti-Money Laundering Council Secretariat. As head of the operational arm of the AMLC, Executive Director Mel Georgie Racela has been executing the ALMC's vision and ensuring sustainable reforms for the Secretariat since 2017. Under his leadership, the AMLC Secretariat found itself serving the Filipino as a fully functional financial intelligence unit, and is handling the anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financial supervisory office, or in short, the AML CTF supervisory office. Prior to this, he had been holding positions in the Bangko Sentral of the Philippines for 21 years in the areas of banking supervision, legal counseling, and litigation, as well as financial investigation. Attorney Racela contributed largely to legislative and regulatory framework developments, which filled the critical gap in the country's AML-CTF defense, such as the casino law and its implementing rules and regulations, the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, and recently RA 11521, which recently amended RA 9160, or the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2001. Further, under his supervision were the approval of the second National Risk Assessment Report, which evaluated the overall threat and effectiveness of the Philippines' AML-CTF mechanisms. Okay, and these are primarily efforts of the government and the private sector in combating money laundering and terrorism financing in the Philippines. He holds a master's degree in law from the International Legal Studies from Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C., where he graduated as a Dean's Lister. And he obtained his Bachelor of Laws degree from the San Beda University and his accounting degree from the University of De La Salle. Let us all welcome Attorney Mel Georgie Racela of AMLC. Good morning, Attorney.
Good morning, Ms. Techi, and thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Good morning also to Mr. Noel Carino and to my colleague, Senior Assistant Governor Iluminada Sikat. And ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everyone. I was tasked to discuss the following topics this morning. First, who is the AMLC? And second, I will provide you some updates in regard to Republic Act 11521. I hope you already heard about this, most especially because real estate brokers are now covered persons under this law. And ongoing programs, because of the inclusion of real estate brokers and developers as covered persons, we adopted several programs, and I will discuss this also with you. We also have other updates and whatever actions or steps that the AMLC did during the COVID-19 lockdowns or quarantine, community quarantines. So let's start by introducing to you the Anti-Money Laundering Council. So as a governmental organization, we have our own vision and mission. Of course, our vision is to be a world-class financial intelligence unit that will help establish and maintain an internationally compliant and effective anti-money laundering regime, which will provide the Filipino people with a sound, dynamic, and strong financial system in an environment conducive to the promotion of social justice, political stability, and sustainable economic growth. Towards this goal, the AMLC shall, without fear or favor, investigate and cause the prosecution of money laundering offenses. We also have our mission, which is to protect and preserve the integrity and confidentiality of bank accounts, to ensure that the Philippines shall not be used as a money laundering site for proceeds of any unlawful activity, and to extend cooperation in transnational investigations and prosecutions of persons involved in money laundering activities. So the ones highlighted in red are the new inclusions under Republic Act 11521, issued just this year. Later on, we will run through some of the salient points of such amendment. Let me introduce to you the members of the council as well as the chairman. The chairman of the Anti-Money Laundering Council is the governor of the BSP. And the members are the chairperson of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Attorney Emilio Aquino. And another member is Commissioner of the Insurance Commission, Attorney Dennis Funa. Of course, the governor is Dr. Benjamin Jokno. The law likewise created or authorized the council to establish and organize an AMLC secretariat that will be primarily tasked to assist the Anti-Money Laundering Council in the discharge of their functions. And this secretariat is headed by an executive director and shall be appointed to serve and continuously or cumulatively for 5 years. The term of the executive director is 5 years. I'm currently in my third year, and I'm due to my position or my term will end on August of 2022. There are other provisions under this in that the secretariat, in organizing the secretariat, the council shall appoint from those who have served continuously or cumulatively for at least 5 years either in the BSP, the SEC, or the Insurance Commission. This is to ensure that political accommodations in regard to appointments within the council, within the secretariat, will not be favored because it limits only those that may be appointed to the secretariat as those coming from BSP, SEC, and the Insurance Commission. To simplify, the council is just composed of 3 persons, while the secretariat, which I head, would be the one handling the day-to-day operations. And also, just to emphasize, the only thing common between the AMLC secretariat and the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is that, one, we are considered as BSP employees, and number 2, we are headed by a common chairman who is the BSP governor. Other than that, we are essentially a separate agency and distinct from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. I will mention quickly the powers and functions of the AMLC. And you might heard this already. The AMLC is a hybrid financial intelligence unit. Why hybrid? Because it possesses powers and functions which are normally distributed to different agencies in similar jurisdictions. So number 1, a central anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing authority. This AMLC is the supervisor and enforcer of AMLCTF. That is specifically mentioned in our charter, in that we can impose administrative sanctions against individuals in the implementation of the law and its implementing rules and regulations. It is also the lead agency on AMLCTF matters and authority to resolve administrative cases. We are also the international cooperation advocate, and part of our mandate is to provide a training program for AMLCTF. So this is part of our initiatives and mandate. And as financial intelligence unit, and this is the primary function of a financial intelligence unit, and that is to receive, analyze, and disseminate intelligence information. So what do we receive? We receive covert transactions as well as suspicious transactions from our covered persons. So covert transactions mean transactions in excess of 500,000 pesos. But for purposes of real estate brokers and developers, covert transactions are transactions in cash exceeding 7.5 million pesos. Okay? Transactions in cash exceeding 7.5 million pesos. And STRs are not connected in any way with the amount of the transaction, but rather several circumstances should exist before any covered person can file a suspicious transaction report. So what does AMLC do with these reports? We analyze these reports and convert this into intelligence products, which we share with our stakeholders, including law enforcement agencies, domestically as well as internationally, and our covered persons who have signed an information sharing protocol with us. We share this so that we can receive a more specific suspicious transaction reports. So that is what a typical financial intelligence unit does, and that is within the functions of the AMLC. But other than a financial intelligence unit, and this is what makes us hybrid, we likewise investigate money laundering and terrorism financing. What does that mean? So the National Bureau of Investigation, as well as the Philippine National Police and the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agencies, we all know that they are all the domestic law enforcement agencies of the Philippines. But for money laundering and terrorism financing, this was designated to or assigned to the AMLC. And so we are the primary investigator for money laundering as well as terrorism financing. And to implement or execute this function, we need to collaborate with our law enforcement agencies. As you are all aware, money laundering is a derivative offense. And I want to highlight this. Money laundering is a derivative offense, meaning there must be a predicate offense before money laundering can be committed. And in the commission of the predicate offense, there must be proceeds of those predicate offenses. And so if we do not collaborate with our LEAs or law enforcement agencies in the country, we have nothing to investigate. The intelligence database that we have, which is very rich, will just be worthless and be lying in our own database. And so we closely collaborate with our LEAs to be effective in our investigation function. As government representative on MLTF cases, we likewise initiate freeze order proceedings. So after fully investigating a case, we build up and file the necessary cases to freeze the bank accounts. And when the freeze order has expired, we file the necessary civil for future proceedings with the court. And we also act as a complainant in the criminal case for money laundering and terrorism financing cases, which we file with the Department of Justice. So this is also one of the functions that makes us a hybrid FIU, because we do not only investigate money laundering and terrorism financing cases, we also cause the filing of these cases. So essentially, we also do prosecutorial function. And that's what makes us a hybrid FIU. And in gist is what the AMLC does. However, I wanted to highlight that the AMLC is also a supervisory authority, in that our function is to ensure that our covered persons comply with AML laws, rules, and regulations. So at the very first instance, we already engage our covered persons in regard to their compliance with AML CFT. And we do that by co-supervising them. For instance, for banks, we all know that Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is already supervising banks, but the reports of examination, which is the end product of every on-site examination, is referred to the AMLC for our appropriate action. And so we likewise act on those violations, particularly in regard to the Anti-Money Laundering Act, as well as the regulations implementing the act. For instance, also, the securities brokers, the insurance companies, money service businesses, or remittance companies. These are all supervised by BSP, SEC, and IC. All the reports or results of the on-site examinations are referred to the AMLC for our appropriate action. Question: if there's a violation discovered by the BSP, SEC, or IC, and they already imposed a penalty in regard to that violation, can the AMLC still impose sanctions? Our response is that yes, we also can impose a sanction in regard to any violation of the AMLA, the implementing rules and regulations. Another example is PAGCOR. So PAGCOR is the primary licensor of casinos as well as offshore gaming operators. Last year and 2 years ago, in 2019, we started our own on-site examination of our land-based casino operators, and in collaboration with PAGCOR. And we finished all the land-based casino operator. We likewise started at the fourth quarter of 2019 the on-site of the offshore gaming operators. However, due to the pandemic, we only finished approximately 1/3 of these offshore gaming operators. However, we adapted with the pandemic and reconfigured our online our examination, in that we proceeded with our examination through offsite. And so by doing this, we requested our covered persons, the August, to submit instead documentary requirements. And this will address 75% at least of our examination requirements. And so that is how the AMLC works. We conduct on-site examinations or compliance testing or compliance checking. We also have our rules of procedure on administrative cases. For any violation of the AMLA or its implementing rules and regulations, we file formal charges for against covered persons and their officers and stockholders or directors. And then this formal charge will proceed in accordance with the rules of procedure on administrative cases. At the end of such case, we will impose administrative sanctions against covered persons, their stockholders, directors, or officers, as the case may be. So this is how we implement our AMLA and its implementing rules and regulations. So now let's proceed with Republic Act 11521. I hope you already heard about this law. This should be interesting to all of you, CREBA members, officers, and whoever is participating in this webinar. So the AMLA, just to show you how the AMLA has been amended for several years. It is probably one of the most amended laws in our country, reflecting its dynamic nature and the constant need to be relevant in the changing times. Effective on January 30, 2021, the passage of Republic Act 11521, which amended the AMLA, is vital to address the technical compliance deficiencies identified in the country's mutual evaluation report. Salient features of Republic Act 11521. The inclusion, as mentioned a while ago, of real estate brokers and real estate developers, and as well as offshore gaming operators and their service providers under the AMLA. Inclusion of Section 254 on the attempt to evade or defeat tax of the National Internal Revenue Code, which is the tax evasion provision under the law, as a predicate crime to money laundering, where the basic tax due in the final assessment is in excess of 25 million pesos. Violation of Section 19A3 of the Strategic Trade Management Act in relation to proliferation financing of weapons of mass destruction, pursuant to UNSCR 1718 and 2231, also as a predicate crime to money laundering. And expansion of the AMLC's investigative power to include investigative techniques available to other law enforcement agencies like search and seizure, application to search, as well as obtain records and documents. Another essential feature of the recent law is the authority of the AMLC to implement targeted financial sanctions, again in relation to proliferation financing of weapons of mass destruction. And the authority of the AMLAC to preserve, manage, or dispose assets pursuant to its freeze order, asset preservation order, or judgment of forfeiture. Prohibition on the issuance of injunction against the freeze order and asset preservation, as well as provision on information security and confidentiality. Suffice to say, the inclusion of real estate brokers and developers was a challenge prior to the passage of this amendment due to some opposition in the industry and among the legislators themselves. Fortunately, the AMLC had staunch defenders like Congressman Juni Kua, who was the chairperson of the Committee on Banks in the House of Representatives, who was very instrumental in the passage of Republic Act 11521. Now let's proceed with the ongoing programs for the real estate sector. So the AMLC conducts webinars to equip the newly classified covered persons with the fundamental AML-CTF knowledge that should be integrated in their day-to-day operations as covered persons. These sessions assist the participants in complying with the registration requirements under existing rules and regulations. So far, 4,116 participants have attended the AMLC's webinars. More schedules of the webinar for real estate stakeholders were posted in the AMLC website. And I encourage everyone to register early. We noticed that last week we scheduled 3 webinars. Unfortunately, there were only less than 100 who registered in those webinars. So we have to cancel them and reschedule them and merge them into one webinar, which we did last Monday. So let's set aside the mañana habit. If you can register, register. And if we see a good number of registrants for one specific day, then we will proceed with our webinar. But please don't wait for the deadline. And speaking of deadlines, we are in the process of revising the anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing guidelines for designated non-financial businesses and professions, or DNFBP. This is the sector where real estate brokers and real estate developers are falling into. We call you the DNFBP sector. We take into account various proposals from our partner agencies, like the Professional Regulation Commission, as well as the comments coming from our previous webinars, from industry associations, including the setting of a new registration deadline. So currently, the registration has been extended for real estate developers, real estate brokers, and offshore gaming operators, and OGO service providers. So out of those 4,000 participants, more than 50% have already registered with the AMLC. And we highly encourage our brokers and developers to register with the AMLC as soon as possible. Please do not wait for another deadline to be set. And this will be a fixed deadline if we fix this. And such deadline will be part of our DNFBP guidelines. As mentioned last week, 2 scheduled webinars for real estate stakeholders have been canceled due to limited number of participants. Again, we observe that real estate stakeholders have a declining eagerness to register when they realize that we extended the deadline for registration. Well, for your information, the initial deadline was March 16. But since we are still revising the DNFBP guidelines, we decided to just include the deadline for registration in the updated guidelines or DNFBP guidelines. So other ongoing programs is our constant coordination with the Professional Regulatory Board of Real Estate Services, Real Estate Service, in collaboration with PRB RES. I think we were able to organize 3 webinars in coordination with them. And so the participants were given training credits for attendance or participating in this webinar. So we continue to coordinate with PRB RES so that we can give credits to participating individuals, brokers, and developers. And coordination meetings with real estate groups. Again, we are in the stage where we are scanning the environment. So suggestions and contributions in regard to the drafting of our guidelines are welcome. Simplification of registration procedures. Again, I would like to highlight that registration is very simple. It is online. You don't have to visit the AMLC. the online registration system has been in existence since 2018. So you will have to just download certain apps and then register and then upload your license card, which will serve as your identification card. Of course, understand that you will be issued an AMLC certificate. And so we need to really institute some controls in that we will not issue AMLC certificates if we do not see proof that you are a duly registered and licensed real estate broker. And so just uploading your license card with the PRC will suffice and establish proof that you are a duly licensed real estate broker. And as mentioned, we are in the process of revising or amending or repealing our DNFBP guidelines. And alongside that guidelines is our registration and reporting guidelines, of course, to accommodate the transaction codes that brokers and developers will file with the AMLC. Now let's proceed with other updates. Perhaps I can give you some context in regard to the actions taken by the entire country. So Congress has already passed the necessary laws, and the executive department has established the one nation approach again to fight money laundering and terrorism financing, and that is through the issuance of Executive Order number 68. And perhaps you will be asking, what does the Judiciary Department contribute to this fight against money laundering and terrorism financing? So let me share with you that the Supreme Court likewise participated in our quest to fight money laundering and terrorism financing. On March 23, 2021, the Supreme Court and Bank approved the rule of procedure in cases of bank inquiry into or examination of deposits and investment accounts relating to an unlawful activity or a money laundering offense under Republic Act number 9160 as amended. Of course, I know this is a very long title, but this is what will govern the bank inquiry orders issued by the Court of Appeals. The salient features are as follows: an ex parte application, which is already existing under the law, but of course formalized by the Court of Appeals. And the bank inquiry order shall be effective, and this is very novel, for a period of 4 months. Before, there was no expiration of the bank inquiry order, and now there's an expiration for a period of 4 months and extendable by another 4 months. So this is based on Section 13, which is a product of our negotiation with the committee members headed by the Chief Justice, then Chief Justice Diosdado Peralta, as well as the presiding justice of the Court of Appeals. And also another member of that committee is the now Chief Justice Alex Esmundo. So the 4th month is critical month for the AMLC because it is when the investigation report on the accounts must be completed in accordance with our quality management system. Third, the bank inquiry order shall direct the institution to allow AMLC full and immediate access to all records, documents, and objects relating to the subject account. This is based on Section 11, and objects include CCTV footages, as well as other documents and information that the AMLC may find necessary to complete its investigation. Fourth is disclosure, divulging, or communication to the owner by any officer or employee of the covered person shall constitute contempt of court. Again, this is in addition to any administrative case that the AMLC may file, as well as a criminal case which the AMLC may file against the person of the officer or employee tipping off any holder or owner of the account. And finally, although the rule of procedure in cases was already approved by the NBAC, by the Supreme Court NBAC, it will take effect following its publication. So far, they have not published this rule of procedure. We are still awaiting for its publication, and information disclosed to us is that it is estimated to be published in May or next month of 2021. Also, on the same NBank session on March 23, 2021, the Supreme Court likewise approved the rule on asset preservation, seizure, and forfeiture in criminal cases. Again, this is another novel rule of procedure in that the Supreme Court recognized that there are proceeds of unlawful activities that are the subject of criminal cases. However, a previous rule of procedure is only applicable on civil cases. Now they issued a similar rule of procedure but applicable to criminal cases. So several highlights are as follows. The subject of the rule provides for forfeiture in criminal cases of property, including bank accounts, that is the subject of the crime, the proceeds or fruits of the crime, or any property used as the means of committing an unlawful activity or money laundering offense. So for kidnapping for ransom, the ransom payment is the subject of the crime, and for perhaps a drug laboratory, all those assets where the drug laboratory is located can be incorporated in number 3 because of an all-encompassing provision that says any property used as the means of committing an unlawful activity or money laundering offense under RA 9160 as amended. So the land where that drug laboratory is discovered, or if it is a condominium unit, the entire condominium unit can be the subject of our criminal forfeiture case. So this highlights that proceeds of the crime may be forfeited, and proceeds may include bank accounts and investments. Second, the rule provides for the remedies of the Provisional Asset Preservation Order and Asset Preservation Order. And third, the rules designated the AMLC as the one who will serve the PAPO or APO or any of its deputized officers upon the accused. And the second and third points highlights that the remedies of PAPO and APO are available, and available in civil forfeiture is also available in criminal forfeiture. Finally, as similarly with the rule of procedure on bank inquiry, it will take effect following its publication sometime around May 2021. As for my last topic, what are the relevant COVID-19 responses that the AMLC has instituted? The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, we all know, has presented an opportunity for money launderers and other criminals. In response to this threat, the AMLC proactively conducted analysis of the financial crime landscape, covering the period of the pandemic and using suspicious transaction reports filed by covered persons. This report is, we entitled this COVID-19 Pandemic Report, is posted in our website. If you have time, you may read this and you may download this study and read this. We were able to identify several crimes that were committed during the lockdown period. In addition, we also issued the second part of our online sexual exploitation of children study, covering the period 2019 to first half of 2020. Previously, the AMLC has issued the first part of this study, which covered the period 2015 to 2018. Just a teaser, from the 3,000 persons of interest identified in our first study, our second study identified more than 23,000 persons of interest. Also, we have this posted in our website. The sanitized version is posted in our website. You may wish to read that study. It's a very interesting study. It is also worth noting that the AMLC shared previous studies with supervising authorities, law enforcement agencies, and to our public-private partnership programs partners. A redacted version, as mentioned, is also published online. And as covered persons become more aware of typologies and red flags, especially with the dissemination of our studies, the AMLC expects a continued rise in suspicious transaction filing, which is crucial in our financial intelligence gathering and investigation against money laundering and its predicate crimes, and terrorism and its financing. The AMLC, as mentioned also a while ago, conducted AMLCTF webinars, allowing for a much greater audience. Moreover, upon shifting to a more lenient community quarantine, the AMLC proceeded with its recruitment process and hired 15 employees more as of December 31, 2020, bringing its total manpower complement to 161. The AMLC also deployed several systems which allowed its officers and staff to work remotely and securely. Further, to maintain our cybersecurity resiliency, the AMLC shifted several security controls from on-site systems to cloud controls. This enabled continuous security monitoring and mitigation of cyber threats from information and communication technology assets that are accessing AMLC official data from remote locations. Suffice to say, the AMLAC kept working amidst the pandemic, and rest assured that the AMLAC will continue doing its best to accomplish its mission as earlier discussed in our session. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Attorney Racela, for that very comprehensive and informative presentation. Now, we shall now segue for a bit to acknowledge our guests in this morning Zoom meeting. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the CREBA national officers headed by our national president, President Toti Carino, the vice chairman of our board, Mr. Jerry Navarrete, our director, Elsie Chua, our national treasurer, Connie Beltran, our vice president for chapter affairs, Joe Yumol, and our director, Bobby Alvarez Jr. We also with us this morning, a past president of CREBA, Mr. June Dulalia. Welcome, June. And of course, our executive director for our LaSalle program, EdPrem, our program director, Avi Acuña, is with us, and our guest from the Pag-ibig Fund, Joseph Dilig. Good morning po, Mr. Dilig. And from our chapters are the following officers. From Palawan chapter is Norma Jimenez, followed by Tarlac, Perla Espina, Baguio, Ryan Tablac, Negros, Roy Villa, Jensan, Sid Protasio, Pampanga, Carla and Jimmy Espinosa, Davao, Malu Monteverde, Angeles, Tito Lasatin, and from Laguna, our National Director, Rudy Pua. Welcome to all of you and thank you for joining us. So we shall now proceed with the open forum. This will be a panel discussion composed of our two resource persons, the Honorable Iluminada Sikat of BSP and Attorney Mel Georgie Racela of the AMLA. And our National President, Toti Carino, will also join the panel discussion. And he will be the first to give his comments. So, Mr. President Toti, please give your remarks.
Well, it seems like both agencies of government, including, of course, the central bank, is well prepared, taking into consideration the higher inflation that we would be expecting. So we just hope that this really will be implemented down to the smallest bureaus. As we all very well know, the biggest impact that we still have is still on the CREATE bill, wherein the VAT thresholds have been have been vetoed by the president, where that is a big impact still on the industry. And we're hoping to go on an appeal and find out how we can do this. Housing is a very vital component of the economy. It creates a lot of multiplier effects on the industry. So having a robust housing sector will definitely be a contribution to the efforts of our economies, no, to ensure that we are able to fight this situation all throughout. So those are my comments, Techi, and I do hope the others can also participate in trying to see how the measures are being implemented.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, President Totti. Now, for lack of time, the chat group has already been answering some of the questions that are posted in the Q&A. So there's just some few more left. But let me start off with the Bangko Central. What is the medium term, let's say for the next 3 years, policy on loans by the Bangko Central? Because in housing, it is, we all know, it is high financing, no? Capital intensive yan at ang mga utang ay milyon. So hindi naman ganun kadali na makabayad sila kasi ang ating priorities, of course, is food, followed by health. Now, health becomes number one. And then, of course, education of our children. Ika-4 lang or siguro number 5 lang ang housing. No? So pagka nagkakaipitan na tayo sa pondo, ang nangyayari, medyo napapabayaan na yung amortization. Yet, reality yan hindi naman natin po pwedeng pabayaan kasi malaki din ang epekto sa mga tao, lalo na yung mga first-time home buyers. So, can you enlighten us, Honorable Sikat, on what are the medium term, let's say the next 3 years to 5 years, on how the government or the banks will be treating our loans?
Sorry. Maraming salamat po for that question. Recently po, di ba, naibaba po ng Bangko Sentral yung mga policy rates po niya. Ang intention po nito ay mapababa talaga ang lending rate at bumaba ito at maramdaman ng mga borrowers. Yung pong recent reduction in policy rate by 200 basis points, nakapagpababa po ito ng interest rate na pwedeng ipataw ng mga bangko sa kanilang borrowers. Yun po ang una, no? Kasi po ang role po ng Bangko Sentral ay para to ensure that there are sufficient liquidity that would support the requirement of the economy, including the real estate sector. Yung pong pag-cut namin ng reserve requirement ratio from 14% to 12%, this will allow the banks to free up some of this liquidity in order to relend these to their borrowers. Ito pong mga recent policy measures na ginawa ng Bangko Sentral ay sagot po ito dahil sa pandemic environment na nag-prevail po ng last year. Ngayon, in order that the situation in the liquidity will not affect the economic activity, kaya po ito ginawa ng Bangko Sentral. Ngayon po, sa inyong katanungan, ano ba yung mga relief measures na nagawa, no, para matulungan ang ating mga borrowers? Ang ginawa po ng Bangko Sentral, nag-provide po siya ng relief measures sa mga BSP regulated institutions. Para sa ganon, yung pong relief measures na binigay namin sa mga bangko ay ma-extend niya in turn sa kanyang mga borrowers. Kasama na po dito yung pong aming pagpapaluwag po sa yung temporary grace period or restructuring of some of the BSP FI loans the BFF loans which are experiencing some difficulty in repayment. So, ine-expect po ng Bangko Sentral na ito pong measure na ito ay ma-share niya rin sa kanyang mga borrowers. So kung nagbigay po kami ng relief measures na pwede niya pong pahabain o i-restructure ang loans niya, pwede niya rin sa mga bangko, so pwede rin po niyang i-extend itong mga bangko na ito, i-extend niya sa mga kliyente niya. So yun po ang aming katugunan dahil sa sitwasyon na nangyari during the pandemic. Tapos po, nais ko rin pong sabihin na meron pong mga measures na ginawa ang Bangko Sentral. Like for instance po, meron po tayong reserve requirement. Yung reserve requirement po, dapat po dinideposit na yan sa Bangko Sentral. Part po yan ng prudential measure ng Bangko Sentral. But because of the liquidity constraints that we experienced in 2020, and to encourage the banks to lend out some of the funds to the affected sectors like the real estate, ang ginawa po namin, inamend po namin the way banks would comply with reserve requirement deposit with the BSP. Inalaw po namin yung mga bagong utang or new loans that will be extended to borrowers, including the real sector, MSMEs, and strategically important companies which are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic to be part of this compliance to reserve requirement. Ano po ba ang effect nito? Ang effect po nito ay para mapaluwag po yung amount ng loans na pwedeng i-extend ng mga bangko para sa mga borrowers niya. So instead of the liquidity being constrained, ito po ay will allow more loans by the banks for their clients, including the real estate sector. Yung binigay nyo pong panahon, 3 taon, ay napakahaba. Yung pong policy measures po ng Central Bank ay nagre-respond din po ito sa kung ano po ang pagbabago sa global environment, including what is happening in the domestic market. Pero ang Bangko Sentral po ay talagang pushing for an environment of low interest nang sa ganun po maka-recover ang ating enterprises and consumers given the challenges under the pandemic. Salamat po.
Ms. Sikat, magkano po ang interest rate ngayon sa atin sa housing?
Ngayon po, hindi ko hawak ang datos namin may bibigay ko po yan later, but some of my colleagues at this forum may have the information, so I can share that to you. Pero po in general, dahil po sa pagbaba ng policy rate ng Bangko Sentral, ito po ay nakatulong sa pagbaba rin ng ibang market rates.
Yeah. Okay. Salamat po. The next one is kung talaga bang hindi na makabayad, wala ng trabaho, di ba? Foreclosure, is it an option? And how soon do you think will foreclosure be applied?
Yung pong foreclosure ay depende po sa pag-uusap ng bangko at ng kliyente. So maaari po nilang pag-usapan kung magde-decide na po ba ng foreclosure or restructuring. Ang polisiya po ng Bangko Sentral is to encourage the banks to extend the relief measures that we have provided to them. And this includes restructuring or lengthening the maturity of the outstanding loans. So ito po ay nasa pag-uusap ng bangko at ng borrower.
Opo. Except that ano ho yung basic guideline? Let's say, kamukha ho nung restructuring. Kung, kasi 1.5 taon na tayo or a little over one year of pandemic. So, hanggang kailan po yung deadline ng restructuring? Siyempre, 6 na buwan na hindi nakabayad, walang trabaho, may sakit pa. And then, kailan po mag-a-apply yung request for restructuring? Tapos po, kung kailan matatapos yung provision for the restructuring at mauuwi na talaga, wala nang magagawa, mauuwi na talaga sa foreclosure. Ano ho yung timeline? Kasi po, kung ako yung ordinaryong borrower na walang trabaho, no, hindi ko talaga kaya magbayad. It adds up to the anxiety na day-to-day mawawala pa tong bahay na tinitiran ko. So if the Bangko Sentral or the banks can come up at least with the timeline. Ito ang provision mo na magpa-restructure ka. Ito yung provision mo na wala na tayong magagawa, talagang foreclosure na tayo. So at least naman, alam natin yung timeline na susundan natin. At second consideration, kung sakali po ba na yung bangko ko, hindi natin alam, no? Because wala naman ako actual loan. Ang sa akin lang, theoretically, kung yung bangko ko does not comply with these incentives being extended by the Bangko Sentral, kanino po ako hihingi ng tulong para naman matulungan ako na mabigyan man lang ako ng relief?
Aha. Ang bangko ho natin ay katulad din ng ordinary business enterprises, ano? Kailangan din po nilang maging afloat. Ang kagandahan lang po ngayon kasi sufficiently capitalized ang mga bangko, and therefore kung magkaroon po ng non-performing asset or non-performing loan, yung current capacity nila to cover this because they have sufficient capital to back this up ay mataas po, no? So ngayon yun po ang una. Pero po katulad din ng mga enterprises, ang bangko rin po ay may hangganan kung hanggang kailan nila kayang i-restructure ang loan. So katulad po ng sinabi ko, para hindi sila masyadong mahirapan, nagbigay po ng relief measures ang Bangko Sentral. Ngayon po, ito pong relief measures na to ay in terms of grant of temporary grace period or restructuring from past due loans and non-performing loan classification until December 2021. So pwede pong ipagpaliban muna ng mga bangko na i-recognize nila itong non-performing loan hanggang December of 2021. But of course, as I said, katulad din po ang bangko ng ordinary business enterprise, and they also have to keep afloat because they are also answerable to their own stockholders. Subalit, in-encourage po ng Bangko Sentral na kung kakayanin po ng bangko, kaya ng kanilang financial resources to restructure the loans or to offer less onerous payment terms. Nang sa gayon po, hindi naman mahirapan ang kanyang mga borrowers. So wala pong deadline on the restructuring. Nasa pag-uusap po yon ng bangko at ng kliyente niya. So far po, ayon sa aming nakikita sa data na sinasubmit po ng mga bangko sa amin, karamihan po ng mga bangko have engaged in restructuring repayment program or restructuring arrangement program with their clients.
Thank you po. Now, there is a question coming in from Grace Eliasar. She's asking that there is support for residential units. No? May mga loans take out and some restructuring that are being extended to residential units. But she feels that this is not equally extended to commercial establishments being managed by SMSE. Parang hindi ganun kaluwat at hindi ganun kaganda yung suporta. Pag commercial yung loan na gagawin mo at kung sakali man nag-default ka sa commercial establishments mo, hindi ganun kaluwag. No? That is her comment. So may she be enlightened on that it is equally extended? Is it?
The loans provided by the banks would also depend on their evaluation of the financial condition of the borrower. Tinitignan po nila ang kakayanan ng borrower nila at saka yun din pong kakayanan nila to provide the loans that is being requested from them. Nasabi ko nga po kanina, karamihan po ng mga reports ng mga bangko sa amin wala naman po silang I mean, when they report to us, they stated that there is not much reports on restructuring or ano po or request from the borrowers for restructuring. Ang nakikita nga lang po namin, yung ibang mga corporates din or borrowers are also adamant on borrowing kasi may uncertainty din po sila na hinaharap. Like for instance, mababa po ang demand ngayon for some of the for instance, yung mga demand for purchase of property or construction of properties. Kaya mababa rin po ang kanilang interest to borrow at this time. Mahina po pa kasi mataas pa po ang uncertainty. So sa palagay po namin, ang desisyon ng bangko to lend out to corporates would also depend on the prospects of the business operations of the borrower.
Yeah. Thank you po, Ms. I think that should also answer the question of Ms. Ria Canlas about the innovative technology and the support on the funds and loans of this particular industry. Pareho silang na-cover nung answer ni Ms. Now, of course, some questions are being handled already by the chat room. No? Another question from Emerald Agpawa. Given the adverse effect of what is your projection of the return of the industry to pre-pandemic level? Medyo mahirap yata yun sagutin, Ms. Emerald, kasi very uncertain pa yung situation natin. Nobody can really predict. For the if an articles indicate that the primary includes okay, now I'd like to shift to some questions addressed to Attorney Sikat on the AMLA. Attorney Racela Radi, I'm sorry, regarding AMLA. Just to concretize, the very comprehensive presentation that you made, but I'd like to focus on real estate and it's the effect of the AMLA on real estate. So, ang assumption natin ganito, how many transactions, of course, the approved cutoff is 7.5 million. Anything 7.5 million and above will have to be reported. That's premise number one. Number two, of course, I'd like to acknowledge, get some credit on this because initially the thinking of government was to set it at 500,000 and CREBA fought long and hard to up the cutoff, and finally we were able to be comfortable with 7.5 million, which was eventually approved. Kasi yung 500,000 po, socialized housing. Ibig nyo bang sabihin, lahat ng bahay na gagawin namin, pati socialized i-report. So it is just really very logical that eventually the cutoff was set at 7.5 million. We're happy and comfortable with that. Now, ang question, ilang transaction po na 7.5 and above ang kailangan para ho kami mag-register sa AMLA? And then the second question, and of course, I was happy to hear that the bank secrecy law has already been open for investigation of questionable transaction on AMLA. That's a good development. So yun lang po, importante, And then, well, I'll just raise the second question later. But first is, ilang transaction po para kailangan mag-register tayo sa AMLA?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Techi, for that question. But before I answer that question, I want to put it in proper context. The reportable transaction is more than 7.5 million pesos. So meaning 7.5 million pesos and 1 centavo. So if exactly 7.5, you need not report. That's first. Second, cash transaction. What you will report is single cash transaction, not the cash transaction that you are familiar with, meaning full payment? No. Cash transaction meaning nasa bayong, nasa maleta, yung 7.5 million pesos and 1 centavo, yun yung binigay sa broker or developer. That you have to report as a covered transaction report. Okay, so it's a single cash transaction. How about if you receive 3.5 million pesos today, and then you received another 3.5 and 1 centavo the next day or 1 week after or 1 month after? Will you combine those transactions? No, you will not combine those transactions. It's again single cash transaction exceeding 7.5 million pesos. So meaning cold cash. Okay? And we all know that this is not a normal transaction in the industry. You don't normally bring 7.5 million, more than 7.5 million pesos in cash to buy a condominium unit, to buy a socialized housing unit, or any property for that matter. So we're happy with that threshold amount. Although again, we would like to contextualize that it's not really merely reporting once you get those funds, but really the obligation of a covered person is to conduct KYC. That's number one. Number two, to keep the records of your customers. And number three is yung reporting of covered as well as suspicious transactions. So to respond to your question, Ms. Techi, ilan transactions before you register? There is no such threshold number of covered transaction reports. If you are already a covered person and you are now a covered person as real estate broker, you should register with the AMLC for two reasons. First, so that you can immediately file a covered transaction whenever you experience such transaction, or file a suspicious transaction whenever circumstances for filing STR exist. And second, you are now a supervised individual by the AMLC. So the certificate of registration is not just for purposes of reporting, but also represents that the AMLC is trying to regulate the profession insofar as AML and CFT are concerned.
Yes. Thank you po. Question ko lang. Who will report? The broker, the developer, the bank, whoever?
Okay, the broker, whoever dealt with the customer, will report that transaction. Okay, I will dig deeper into that question. What if the broker is employed by a developer? If the broker is fully employed or full-time, employed full-time by the developer, meaning he's no longer allowed to practice his or her profession outside the developer, then the developer can report on behalf of the broker. But if the broker exercises his or her profession outside or part-time only with the developer, then the broker will report that transaction.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sa akin lang naman, attorney, ganito, no? Kung ako ang broker o ako ang developer, pag ako nag-report, mare-red tag na ako. Red tag na ako na, dumadaanan ng ganyang questionable transaction si Techi Bautista. It is not to my interest at all, attorney, to report and cooperate with you. There must be a better way of encouraging me. I mean, like, bakit ko na may report sa'yo? Alam ko ng anti-money laundering yun eh. Bakit ko namang masisira yung pangalan ko, no? Diba? Parang it is so against human nature to do that. And I don't know, I don't anticipate enough support or encouragement from parties involved.
Yes.
Sorry po for being so direct about it.
No, no problem. And thank you for that comment. Let me respond to that in three ways. First, it's a criminal offense when when you do not file a covered or suspicious transaction. That is a money laundering offense under the Anti-Money Laundering Act. And will we be able to identify you? Well, ultimately, we would, because also have access to real estate transactions in the Land Registration Authority. If we get hold of the deed of sale and there is any indication that you participated in this transaction and you did not report, that is a money laundering offense. And you already heard about your obligation as broker or developer to report, and that would establish knowledge of not reporting such transaction. That's the first point. Second, it will not be disclosed that you file a report with the AMLC. We have a confidentiality provision. All reports submitted to the AMLC are treated as confidential. No media, no editor-in-chief, no individual, even officers and staff of the AMLAC, meaning the chairman, meaning the members of the council, as well as the secretariats, officers and staff, including me, cannot and may not disclose that a report was submitted as well as the contents of such report. So that protects the confidentiality and the importance of submitting a report. And third, I hope that you will not take this against the government. Our objective here is to be as, of course, we all know that it is already being practiced. Based on our study, 22% of our civil forfeiture cases are in the form of real estate. So it's really already being practiced, but we want to preserve the integrity of the sector. So by covering real estate brokers and developers, I hope you will not take this against the government. It is it is merely addressing a loophole that has existed since 2001 when we first passed the AMLA, the Anti-Money Laundering Act. Those are my 3 points to address your concern, Ms. Techi.
Yeah, thank you po. Now, another consideration, no? The requirement for developers and brokers engaged in this AMLA transaction for them to register. No? CREBA is quite active with the ARTA, with the DG Jeremiah Benhica. And one thing that we have learned in our dealings with them is that the instruction of the president that there should be no duplication of requirements. If it is available in one agency, there's no need for you to have another agency that would, would require it and all that. So itong broker's registration is already being monitored by the PRC for licensing requirements. Pakipull out. Pakipull out. And it's also being monitored. We also have to register as brokers with the DSUD, Department of Human Settlements. Dalawa po yung mga departments na nagmo-monitor na po sa amin. So kung kailangan po ng AMLA, ng aming registration or data as brokers or even the certification, mas maganda po siguro na direkto na yung kunin sa PRC or sa DSUD yung aming instead na re-require pa yung broker na siya ang pumunta ron, mag-apply, mag-submit na naman ng mga iba-ibang requirements para makuha, just to cooperate and support the AMLA. Parang mas yun, mas consistent with the intention of the government to simplify and avoid duplication and unnecessary procedures. Yun lang naman po para medyo tulong na rin po natin sa mga brokers na napakahirap po ng buhay para gawin pa namin yun. So yun lang po, if you can consider that, na avoid na po natin yung additional registration and certification. Available po yan sa PRC at saka sa DSUD. No?
If I may comment on that, Ms. Techi. Again, as mentioned, hindi po kayo kailangan magpunta sa AMLAC. You may register through our online registration system. Seamless po yan. And meron po kaming hotline. Ang amin pong mga supervisors are open. You may call them to seek assistance. Hindi po additional burden ito, Ms. Techi. Again, as mentioned, based on our experience, 22% of the subject of our civil forfeiture is already in the real estate, in the form of real estate. So we cannot sit down and just watch launderers abuse our real estate sector. And second, wala pong masyadong burden dito. Kaya po nating fina-facilitate yung reporting through the registration system ay para sa one click sa inyong cellphones o sa inyong mga inyong mga desktop ay pwede kayong mag-report ng ating mga covered transactions. So kung maintindihan lang ho natin yung proseso and mag-register kayo, maintindihan nyo po yan, malalaman nyo na napakadaling mag-report and wala po kayong additional burden dyan. Of course, pinoprotektahan po natin yung sector. And to protect the sector, kailangan mag-participate tayo and we need to invest also sa ating mga compliance, sa compliance system. Again, yung pag-coordinate po sa PRC and other sectors or other government agencies, wala po silang reportorial requirement. Ang AMLC lang po ang mayroong covered transaction reporting and suspicious transaction reporting. And ito po yung mga obligations of a covered person. So hindi po tayo pwedeng i-delegate yan sa ibang government agencies.
Okay, thank you po, Attorney. I have two questions before Joy Yumon. The first one is about what are the documents required by AMLA in order to be assured that the investment has passed through the AMLA law? In other words, wag kami maipit. What are the things that we should look out for to avoid being involved in this?
Oh, okay. Again, I reiterate, you have three obligations under the law as a covered person. First, the conduct of KYC or Know Your Customer. That will come into a KYC form. Remember, when you open a bank account, you fill up a customer information form where you indicate your name, address, and such other information. You just have to ask your customer to fill that up once at the time of onboarding, and you will have the second obligation is to keep records. So you keep those records at hand, on hand whenever requested. Then you can provide that information. And third, reporting requirement. Again, as for the covered transactions, hindi po normal na 7.5 million. Of course, unless aaminin nyo na normal na nagdadala ng 8 million pesos in cold cash para bayaran yung pagbili ng property. And based on our technical working group meetings in Congress and in Senate, hindi po normal na cash transaction. So wala po masyadong reportorial requirement. Of course, yun lang sa suspicious transactions. Again, you are protected under the confidentiality provision. So as to the question, what are the documents required? Wala pong specific document required for you to pursue a real estate brokerage transaction. Okay, yun lang po ay yung KYC, yung Customer Information File, which siyempre dapat po ma-practice na rin po natin yan. We understand the predicament. In fact, in 2002, ay yung mga bangko, ano yun, presidente ng San Miguel, papifill upan namin ng customer information file. Whereas ngayon po, pagka hindi kayo nag-fill up ng CIF sa mga bangko, magtatanong pa kayo, bakit hindi ako nag-file ng CIF? So it's just a matter of practicing the right way of conducting customer due diligence on your customer.
Okay, thank you, Attorney. The next question is coming from the former chairman of the PBRES, Philippine Board of Real Estate, former director, chairman, Dr. E.G. Ong. His question is, ilan na daw po ba ang nag-report sa inyo na brokers or developers tungkol sa ganyang questionable transactions?
Yan po yung example ng aking confidentiality. Pati po yung number ay hindi namin i-disclose. Although meron kaming statistics and broken down into several sectors, but we cannot disclose that information. And remember po, kaka-start lang po natin ng registration. In fact, approximately 2,000 pa lang ang registrants. So it's too early for you to, for us to say and of course disclose the statistics.
Yeah, thank you po. Joe, it's your turn. Joe Yumol. Mute ka.
Okay, sorry. Okay, good noon, attorney. Your guidelines specify that it has to be a transaction, as in we have closed it. Now, however, I mean, like for us, for myself, as soon as I find out enough about my client, even just before closing, and I realized that he may be involved in some kind of anti-money laundering, my level of integrity would actually make me somehow withdraw from closing that transaction. Am I required, or should I, or may I report that? Second question in regard to that, there are some who may be involved in some kind of anti-money laundering, and there's always a way about it because you actually require only those that are paid in cash above 7.5. So if they do it in, say, several installments, and you are, or we as brokers are witness to that, do we report that?
Wow, thank you
Thank you.
po. Thank you for that very interesting questions. As a matter of fact, during our webinars, we discussed this, and thank you for that question. It gives us an opportunity to further dig deeper into the provisions of the law. First, in regard to your first question, you did not close the transaction because you realized that the customer is involved in some sort of predicate offense or money laundering offense.
That's right.
Okay. So under our implementing rules and regulations, you have to report even attempts to transact. So again, transaction as defined under our regulation is any act that establishes a right or an obligation between the parties. And so if there was an attempt, and then you should file a suspicious transaction report. So once you register, you will be given a step-by-step process on how you will file this report. So attempts will also be covered by a suspicious transaction report. Second po, for installments. Okay, perhaps, and I will not mention the name. Perhaps you watched during the Senate hearing that there was a government official who structured bank transactions. Meaning of structure is they break down the transactions so that it will not be part of a covered transaction report. So kung sa bangko po is more than 500,000. So ang ginawa ay nagde-deposit siya ng 450,000 on a daily basis para hindi siya nare-report as covered transaction. In your example po sa real estate, ginawang installment, ginawang transaction 3.5, 3.5 again. So kailangan ko pong i-distinguish yan. Kung ginawa po ng customer yan dahil gusto niyang ma-avoid yung covered cash transaction reporting, yan po ay considered as structuring. Magfa-file po kayo ng suspicious transaction report when you experience that. So yan po minsan yung mga customer, inaamin po nila pagkakausap nyo. Sasabihin niya, ayoko ma-report sa AMLC, kaya hahatiin ko ito. Structuring po yan. That is one of the circumstances for filing an STR. Pero kung normal naman po talaga na ganon, meaning, kunwari ay meron siyang remittances. Ang remittance niya ay in tranches. So magre-remit din ako sa iyo in tranches. Dumating yung 5 million ngayon, i-remit ko sa inyo 5 million. Dumating kinabukasan yung 3 million, dadalhin ko sa inyo in cash yung 3 million. Normal po yung ganun transaction, hindi po niya intended na i-avoid yung covered transaction reporting, then wala pong report po na kailangan kayong i-file.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just follow up, attorney. Would you have a guide for brokers to follow so that they may be able to determine which transaction or which, how to mark something or a transaction as suspicious?
Okay, sa pag-issue po namin, so dalawa po yung aming guidelines in the pipeline. Yung first one po yung DNFPP guidelines na sinasabi namin. Mag-a-attach po kami ng mga customer information file doon para madali nyo ma-download at papafill upan nyo na lang sa mga customers. And second po, ay mag-a-attach din kami ng mga red flag indicators kung tawagin namin. So either doon po sa guidelines namin i-attach yan or doon sa AML reporting and registration guidelines. Yung pong ARRG kung tawagin namin, AMLC reporting and registration guidelines, lahat po ng red flag indicators ng mga sector, banking, casino, SEC, Insurance Commission, lahat po ng red flag indicators naka-attach po doon. So it's also a good article to read kung nagpapaantok po kayo.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, attorney. Ito naman sa akin, very last comment no before we close. Attorney, meron din kasing security angle yan eh. Meron ako ng transaction na suspicious na report ko. Eh syempre, anti-money laundering, definitely mga sindikato yan, ano? Big time. Eh, mahirap namang matrace nilang nagsumbong ako. Oh my God. Anyway, these are considering human nature on how to react to such a requirement. Anyway, comment ko lang po yun. You might wish to look into the human nature of it. So we shall now be closing. Thank you so much, really. Thank you so much for the very informative, comprehensive presentation and discussion. And I'm also very pleased with the attendance. Thank you. Salamat po sa inyong lahat for supporting our efforts. Now we shall hear the closing remarks from our resource person, first by Honorable Iluminada CCAT of Bangko Sentral, followed by Attorney Mel Georgie Racela of the AMLA, and then of course the final closing remark coming from our National President, Toti Carino. Attorney, Honorable CCAT first.
Okay, I will just like to reiterate what I have stated earlier. One, the Philippine economy is really moving towards recovery, and this is supported by improving macro indicators that have presented, and this is also supported by the regulatory and operational relief measures. There are also legislative measures which have been passed or being passed or deliberated at Congress, which can also provide support to the growth of the economy in general and the real sector in particular. Now, second, the real sector, we have seen the real sector as affected by the pandemic. However, there are some good indicators to show that the growth is really in the offing. We see the residential real estate price index going up in some areas. And also we see that there is a continued growth in bank lending to the real estate. But of course, despite all of these assessments, we need to emphasize that the speed and magnitude of the property sector recovery will depend on the way by which the government is able to efficiently roll out the vaccine. So with this, I would like to thank everyone for listening and giving opportunity to the Bangko Sentral to present in this forum. Thank you.
Salamat po, Honorable Sikat. And next, we shall hear the closing remark from Attorney Racela of the AMLA.
Again, I would like to thank CREBA for inviting us in this meeting. I think it's a regular meeting with your officers as well as your members. And so it's such a pleasure for us to be invited here. My last words, and of course, I hope that this will address your concerns in regard to security as well as the reportorial requirements. Edmund Burke once said that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men or women do nothing. We are concerned about security because we are afraid of the evils, because we are afraid of the criminal syndicates. But we also need to recognize that this is the right thing to do. We need to fight crimes. We need to fight criminals. And the confidentiality provision of the law will protect you. The confidentiality is addressed not only to publicists, not to the newspapermen, to the reporters, but also to the officers and staff of the AMLAC and its secretariat. We will protect your identity. We will protect the information that you share with the AMLC. And that is our way of ensuring that we fight criminality. So with that said, again, thank you. And it is our pleasure to be part of this meeting.
Thank you po, Attorney. And finally, our National President for his closing remark, President Toti Carino.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think we had a very fruitful session this morning. And again, thank you to all our members and our officers who has made this real. We are encouraged by the remarks of the Honorable Sikat that government, or at least the central bank, sees na merong light at the end of the tunnel and that government is doing enough, especially in terms of addressing the realities of the crisis and the pandemic by measures that tend to support the economy and keep it afloat. We just hope that in our own initiatives as well, representing the real estate sector, the central bank can also support us in making sure that we take it even one step further, as it seems that the real estate sector cannot simply be defined as real estate index going up. What we really have to look into is the realities of the time, whether we are addressing the housing backlog or not as well. I think that's a very good litmus test for everyone to consider. On the matter of the AMLA, this is my personal take on this, Attorney. While that was a good quote from Edmund Burke, we still need to make the law non-coercive as a better way of encouraging greater nation obligations by the citizens to help the government. It is not, I think, enough that confidentiality is our only blanket. I feel that human nature, as what Techi said, plays a very important role in this obligation. So, but we do laud your efforts in making sure that crimes of this nature is something that would be a thing of the past and we are able to protect our country. So with that said, I'd like to thank both speakers and our officers, Ms. Techi Bautista, our Vice Chairman, and all the other officers for a very fruitful session this morning. Marami pong salamat.
Yeah. Thank you po, President Toti Carino. First, I'd like to thank all of you for participating. I hope that it is substantive enough. It has addressed your concerns and your questions. And I'd like, of course, to say thank you to our speakers, and the panels, the team that they brought with us. I see a lot of people from AMLA and BSP who joined us. Salamat po. And they're the ones who handle the chat box. Salamat. Otherwise, aabutin tayo po ng napakahaba. Salamat po sa inyong lahat. And we look forward to seeing you again in other topics, industry updates that we will put together for you. Good day, everyone. God bless.